Hello, hello. This is the Aligned Birth Podcast. I am one of the hosts of the show, Dr. Shannon, prenatal chiropractor. And today we have a guest on the show. And when she and I were chatting about, well, we've been chatting for a while to come up with the idea for this show, but we're talking about maternal mental health. And we've had several shows on maternal mental health, but today there's going to be like a vocab lesson. So I hope you learn some new words. The word matrescence. So our identity changes in motherhood is one focus of it. And this concept of motherhood doesn't have to be like either or, it's like a both and. And so that's what stands out in my mind. But we're going over all the things. We're going over all kinds of maternal mental health, mood disorders. We're going to go into support versus fixing it, looking at validation and normalization, self-compassion, finding that both and that gray area, and coming in with ways that you can support yourself. So I have a guest on the show, Kristina Tucker. She's a virtual counselor specializing in maternal mental health. She often includes approaches such as EMDR, which is the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, IFS, internal family systems and ego state work, narrative therapy, education and experiencing to facilitate a better understanding of how the brain and body processes stress and trauma. Like, that's a lot. I'm so excited to go into that with her on that. She often uses body-based approaches, pulling from her training as a trauma-conscious yoga instructor, also has thorough training and experience, and enjoys integrating the Christian faith in the counseling process when her clients desire. She's a mom of three, so a 6-year-old boy, 7-year-old boy, 1-year-old girl. So she's got her hands full. Also married to a high school teacher and football coach, so she spends a lot of time at sports. But in her free time, she plays around with creative mediums like knitting, hand embroidery, painting to help ground her and have fun. She posts stuff on social media. She's authentic. She's real. You should follow her. You should reach out to her. I love her. Welcome to the show, Kristina. Welcome to the Aligned Birth Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon, a prenatal chiropractor.
And I'm Rachel, a birth doula and childbirth educator. Together, we're here to bring you conversations about pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. From cesarean to VBAC, hospital to home births, we've experienced it all. We are high school friends who reconnected through our shared passion for health and birth. As moms to 2 young boys, we've both changed careers after our own transformative childbirth experiences.
Join us as we discuss the importance of a healthy body and mind throughout pregnancy, birth, and into motherhood. Our goal is to provide fun, interesting, and helpful conversations and interviews that inspire learning. When your body, mind, and intuition are aligned, you can conquer anything.
Sit back and relax, or grab a notebook and take some notes, or maybe listen as you enjoy a walk. However you choose to listen, we hope you enjoy this episode of the Aligned Birth Podcast. Before we get into the episode today, if you enjoy the content of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate your support in one of 3 ways. First, leave us a review or give us a 5-star rating. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and make a bigger impact. Second, you can sign up for our newsletter. By doing so, you'll be the first to receive new episodes and exclusive bonus resources straight to your inbox each week. Lastly, you can become a direct listener supporter. Running this podcast requires significant time, effort, and resources. Your contribution, no matter the amount, helps us continue providing valuable content to a wider audience. Simply use the links in the show notes to make your donation, sign up for our newsletter, or leave us a review. Every contribution matters and is sincerely appreciated. If the Aligned Birth Podcast is a part of your weekly routine and you love what we are doing, please consider supporting us through one of these 3 options. Your support will create a ripple effect, allowing us to reach more listeners and make a lasting difference.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. Thanks for that wonderful intro, too.
Yes. This is so fun because a lot of times when I have guests on the show, I sometimes haven't met them in real life, but I'm like, I know Kristina in real life. And I'm so excited because I don't even know how you found The Office, but she worked in in my office complex, like in the office above me, we have people and so she was in a counselor's office above me. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And she loves chiropractic care. And her holistic approach to maternal mental health. And then she moved.
Oh, and I moved.
And I was like, I just found you. So that's how I know Kristina.
I felt the same way, for whatever it's worth. I was like, no, I just found her.
I don't want to move. But you've been a real gem, and I'm glad that we have stayed in touch and connected. And like I said, you're on social media a lot. So I know we didn't get to dive real deep into our relationship while you were there, in person. But I just love everything that you share. And when I knew you, you only had the 2 little boys. So you've had a new baby. So you put in here that you've been a counselor for 10 years, but you have a 6, a 7, and 1-year-old. So you've been a counselor before you had children, and then now into that counselor world, you had children. So I want to dive deep a little into your counseling work, how you got to where you are, and how that shifted into that maternal mental health focus.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was one of those, I don't think many people have this experience, but as like a teenage girl, I knew I wanted to be a counselor. So I kind of started undergrad, did psychology and specialization in child and family development, and then went on to get my master's so I could be a counselor. I always knew that I wanted to. I had some just difficult family circumstances, different things, and counseling like helped me get through. So I always knew I wanted to be a counselor. So yes, made it to, and I loved it. Right out of grad school, typically right out of grad school, you're kind of trying to figure out who are my people? What is my kind of niche? What am I, if I'm going to have a niche, like what is my niche? I saw a lot of teens at first and was kind of like, okay, I like this. I'm good at this. Connected with teens, but never really, I don't know, always felt like something was a little lacking. And then kind of in that process, kind of 3-ish years in, with counseling, you get a associate license, you practice for 3 years, and then you can get your full license. And so I, did my associate licensure, got pregnant, timed it all out as best I could. And then when I became a mom, I'm like, whoa, okay. Now I'm seeing client issues, how I'm seeing what my clients are bringing into the office is changing a little bit. I was always super accomplishment driven perfectionist. And so then I had these 2 worlds, and my boys are back to back. They're 18 months apart. So I never stopped, and I was breastfeeding. So I basically went from breastfeeding to pregnant again to breastfeeding to, and I'm still working through all of that. Took super short maternity leaves, which looking back, I'm like, oh, I just, kind of hurt for that young mama in me that was doing it all. But really came against this thing of like, I'm not the same person that I was. And counseling is so relational. And then I was going to the office and I just kept bumping into, I'm not the same person that I was. And then I found that, motherhood was bringing up different stuff for me, like how I was parenting my kids, kind of my relationship with my parents. My parents were great. They did the best that they could with what they had. And also there were some significant gaps. And so I found myself like working through the attachment work and some of the beliefs and different things, as we all do with our own parents, as I'm learning to parent. Then it was just messy. So I started diving into like research and trying to figure out, is this maternal mental health thing? Could this be a niche? And I found myself seeing moms and I was like, oh yeah, this is a thing.
Because you were probably attracting that as well too.
Totally.
Well, and I will say, so I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I feel like it's that Mean Girls scene when the toaster strudels girl, I can't remember her name, and she's like, when Regina George, like, it's the whole, you may think you like gold hoop earrings, or you may think you like this guy, but you could be wrong. And I feel like it's the same thing with motherhood. Like, you might think that everything is fine and, oh, your childhood was great and you have nothing wrong. And then you have a kid and you're like, oh, you could be wrong. There could be things triggering you that you don't realize.
Totally.
I think that's been one of the most eye-opening things with parenting, is not only parenting and then like healing and being aware of what is going on with me.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, totally agree.
It's so eye-opening.
for me, I was super like maybe lucky, I don't know, in the sense of I'm the oldest on one side of my family. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. And so, and I babysat and nannied and all of that through high school, college. That was kind of my side hustle in college and in grad school. And so I like knew the physical part of taking care of babies. And so I think that I went in and I was like, oh, I can do this. This is fine. And the physical part, like I didn't have a huge learning curve there, like a lot of moms. And also it was so hard. And that caught me off guard because I was like, there's a 10-year gap, 12-year gap between me and my younger siblings. And I was like, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
And I did, but I didn't. Yeah.
Exactly. That's motherhood. I did, but I didn't. Like, I didn't. Yeah. Totally. I don't know. And I like when you speak to your own, I mean, not everyone. I just know I identify too with that overachiever and striving and all of that. And then sometimes motherhood, it can kind of slap you in the face a little bit too. One of the things I hear the most in the office though is also how most moms don't realize how difficult postpartum can be. And it doesn't have to be difficult. It's not like a bad difficult. It doesn't have to be a bad difficult thing, but that it's just, there's just a lot going on. Yeah. There's a lot. So there's a lot. So I want to get into this word matrescence. I know we were just talking about this before the show and I was like, am I saying this right? Is this how you say it? But, it is, I pulled up the like definition here too. Cause I was like, oh, what's the definition of it? Blah, blah. All it literally is the process of becoming a mother.
Oh, how helpful.
I'm like, I know. I was like, okay, well, it's not as deep and profound as I thought. Cause it's such a big word. So,
yeah.
I want to get into, that thinking, I guess, shifting that thinking of it in a process of motherhood, how we have a process of adolescence. And then we have this process of motherhood, and that's the adolescence growing into the teenage years. We're very open and forgiving in that time, right? Oh, it's adolescence, But I don't think the same can be said for matrescence. So what does matrescence mean to you and in your line of work?
Yeah. So when I think about matrescence, right, I do go back to that stage of development, just like you said, that has been the most helpful way of learning about it is, okay, we kind of think about and understand for adolescents that kids are coming, from kids to teenage years, they are experiencing all the hormone shifts, all the peer changes and relationship changes. Their bodies are changing dramatically. So when you think about that for adolescents, we all can kind of understand that. I think we have a frame of reference for that. That then when we take that to matrescence, it's the same kind of idea that our bodies have changed dramatically or are changing dramatically. Our hormones are all over the place. Our relationships change dramatically. So it's that's what I think about is, okay, it's a developmental season of life where we go through a lot of changes. The other thing I think about too is you don't just do it once. So it's not just like you have your first baby and then you've gone through that period. It's really the reality of this developmental stage can happen if you've adopted a baby. It can happen if you've experienced loss of a baby. It can happen from baby 1 to 2, from 2 to 3. That there is this season of matrescence always when you're adding a baby or supposed to add a baby and something were to happen. So, yeah.
Now, what about too, as the child is growing, then it's like you're coming into those new seasons of motherhood as well too. So I also see it as not only in each of those like immediate, I guess, after the fact events, but then the growth and the development. Like, I feel like it's the same thing as like postpartum is like forever. I'm like, matrescence is forever.
Yes.
Like, maybe then there's like grand matrescence, or I don't know what word would be for grandmother.
I don't know. I would really love, like, you're exactly right. This is a huge developmental, like, I think we make room for that developmental kind of transition up until people are in their, mid to young 20s, I think. But then we think at some point we all have different markers for when you reach adulthood. But you reach adulthood and it's like, okay. And then maybe you think like mid-age and then elderly, but there is so much gray in the whole process. And right, I think you hit on something really important there, that right, there's developmental changes for us as moms, and dads, any parents, throughout, kind of like we talked about at the beginning. Different stuff is triggered in us as our kids reach different ages.
And
so
I think when you can be graceful with yourself too, because like maybe the early years aren't so bad, but then it's the teenage years or something that really trigger you. And then you can feel a little bit like, well, crap, I've been raising this kid for so long. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't be having these feelings, and you can kind of spiral out of control.
Yeah.
It's very easily done. So I want to get into why the language of matrescence is important, because so Kristina and I were emailing and chatting. We've been trying to do this interview for a while now, and then it just kind of came about, and then like, well, what do we even want to talk about? Because she's got so much, I don't know, everything that, like I said, everything that she shares, I love, and she has so much knowledge with it.
Because I do too much.
No, I love it. I'm like, please keep sharing. This is amazing. Because you'll share like the books that you've read, and then like the artwork and stuff. It's just very, it's so authentic. I love that though. I love that. It's real. It's real. I'm like, I want to see real people, like I don't want to see this fake stuff anymore. But, why? So we communicated a bunch, and then, I was like, well, what if we focus on this? And then you sent this beautiful outline. And I know, I was like, I hope we can get to everything in this outline. But one part was, because I want you to go into this a little bit more, and how we look at matrescence in the Western world, and how we view postpartum in that like Western medical view. Go down that route, and then how kind of like a shift in perspective and that lens can change how we look at postpartum.
Totally. Yeah. So no, I mean, there is so much there, but right, our Western model, think about like postpartum period. Typically it's you see your doctor so many times through pregnancy, and then you have the baby, and then you go in for your next checkup at 6 weeks after. So you got a whole 6-week gap there. Yes, pediatrician has you fill out the little mood survey. So somebody's got sort of an eye on you as mom. But once again, the mood survey is screening for postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. It's screening for diagnosable, like, okay, do we need to be concerned about mom? Is there a problem? Mm-hmm. Instead of this reality of, okay, everything has changed in life pretty much. You have gone to taking care of this little thing that is parasitic. You love it beyond belief, but it takes up literally every ounce of your time. In that very beginning, especially that first month. And it doesn't smile back. It doesn't do anything. It just needs so much. You can tell this is like still really fresh for me.
It's very fresh for you.
Yeah. But so no, and it's okay when you're sitting here saying like, this is hard, and you go to the doctor and you try to be real about this is hard. It's okay. Well, she's not doing well. She's got a problem. Here's an SSRI. We got to fix this problem. Where matrescence allows us this language of like, no. This is understandable. Of course it's hard. And of course you're struggling. What supports do you need? How relationally have things changed for you? What does your support look like? Do you have relational support, or are you doing this kind of on your own? What's that look like? Do you have other kids in the house? What does their care look like? Are there feeding concerns? What do those look like? Because so often, right, the feeding concerns and how you're feeding and breast is best and all the things, that's more stress and more shoulds. And then we go into the shoulds, and then we're beating up on ourselves, and then there goes into depression and anxiety. Like, it's just so much. So this lens of matrescence really gives us this like more soulful, holistic, compassionate, empowering view when we're thinking about this shift into motherhood. It's okay. Yes, you're struggling in which ways, what ways, because there's always going to be some sort of struggle. How are you struggling, and how can we help with that? And yes, maybe I'm a huge fan of some Zoloft. Maybe that is part of the tools. Maybe that is part of the support. but what else? It's not,
Mm-hmm.
okay, 6-week checkup. Here's some Zoloft. Oh, do you have a counselor? All right. Maybe here's a couple you can call. No follow-up. Maybe in 3 to 6 months, depending on your OB, your gynecologist, will they follow up on that? But no. We need ongoing intentional checkups, support, and not pathology, but just okay, what do you, mama, what do you need? I'm not going to help.
I know when you put that in the outline, I was like, oh my gosh, because that's like the lens I look at things through with chiropractic care as well, though, too, because you've got this allopathic, this pathogenic model where we reduce everything down, which we need a kidney doctor, we need a heart doctor, we need a lung doctor, we need all of those special things, but the heart and the kidney and the lungs don't work alone. So when there's also this look at shift in chiropractic care with like that salutogenic, that whole healing, vitalistic body that works together. And I think when you shift that lens of looking at that postpartum time period or that shift into motherhood, instead of it being so pathological and more of that, like, oh yeah, this is just a normal development, like a normal developmental process, but there's things within it that you can get support for outside of just that little check sheet, like you're saying, and just like sending them on their way with this big event, I mean, our teenagers are surrounded by us. We comfort them in their adolescent struggles and those type of things. We don't leave them alone. So we shouldn't leave the moms alone too. So I love that the shift in the language, I think, is important, because then that can shift the lens with what we're looking at.
Right. Because too, I think, well, number one, the statistics of like 85% of moms experience some sort of mood disorder after pregnancy, some sort of big shift in mood in this postpartum period. And actually that statistic holds true even for adoptive parents too. So 85% experience a dramatic change in their mood. And then it goes on, like between 15 and 20% are then perhaps diagnosed with an anxiety depression. But when we're thinking like 85%, that is so high. Like, why are we not then, how can we, as kind of becomes my question of how can we then validate, like, what's going on? Why is it that high? And then that's when I started diving more into some research and trying to understand of like the brain changes, the hormonal changes, you add on the challenges of kind of having an infant, and we're thinking like sleep disturbance, which does not help anything with mood. It makes everything with mood worse.
Everything worse. Yep.
Yes. Like we said, possible feeding challenges. If there was any birth trauma, addressing that. Mom is still trying to process, and dad still trying to process any birth trauma. It's just a recipe for adjustment challenges. Anytime we're going through big adjustment, we need more support.
Well, and I'm just like jotting down notes as we chat, because then I just wrote more than just OB. So that was my trigger to you had mentioned that this isn't to shame the medical providers or the OBs, like, no. As far as like, oh, I only see you at 6 weeks and you didn't catch this and blah, 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 because their business is pregnancy, labor, and birth. So I think I don't know where the shift comes in, but it's like, I think people need to know that there are people out there. There are counselors, there's pelvic floor physical therapists, there's lactation consultants, there's chiropractors, specific to those things that can help. So yes, I think it's tough because that postpartum time period is so hard because you're trying to like heal yourself and keep this baby going and all of that. And then it's like, oh, and now you want me to seek out a counselor and seek out this. So like, I get that, but then that's what we need.
Yeah.
That's the hard part, because it can't just be, oh, we're just going to rely on the OB. Yeah, I think the OBs could do a better job of providing resources of the things and saying, you need to do this. Like, I get that we don't need to get into the whole, like the healthcare issues, but
yes.
Just to say,
that's such a good point though. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
I don't know. Like, it's not just on them. I'm trying to badmouth them, but it's also like, it's tough, but it's knowing tough. that support is out there.
Yes.
Yep.
It's
really tough.
Really tough. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, right. If you can get in touch with a great chiropractor, with a good counselor, eventually pelvic floor, but you could start pelvic floor in pregnancy too. Like these things if you can start some of this support in pregnancy, how then that helps in the adjustment period. Because, right, I think we look
hard
to
that
the
with my
OB
moms.
to do that, right? Because we're there all the time. And then it's like, okay, we're no longer there. But if we could engage with those supports earlier and then you carry them in, my mamas that adjust the best are always the one that have seen me through pregnancy.
Yep.
Always. Yep.
No, same. And my moms too, that even if they didn't reach out to every single person on my resource list that I have, at least they know about those things. They know these words that maybe, OB isn't sharing. And a lot of times they'll come to me for those type of resources, or things like that. So probably the same with you. It's like, oh, I've got this going on, or maybe a little bit more, accessible there. Yeah. So and that we just did an episode, it's not out yet, but it's called Planning for Postpartum. And that's what we kind of talk about. It's like, it's the immediate, like setting up your meals and that type of thing, but it's also like your support system. Like you do need to kind of, I guess, plan a little bit for, that postpartum time. So a little sidebar there.
Yeah. That'll be a good one. I'm excited to listen. Yeah.
I know it is a good one. It is a good one. So in your line of work and what you do with moms who come to see you at whatever point, what does that look like? Because you talked about all the ways that you can support. So yes, there's, medicinal Western medicine support. There's, therapy, counseling, other aspect support. So support versus fixing, something like that along those lines. How does that look when moms come to see you or visit with you? Yeah.
Yep. So for me, a lot of it depends. I start every client. I'm a counselor who very much like starts first relationally. Of you and I have to feel safe here for this to go anywhere. And then I start with where clients at as far as, okay, are we needing education and normalization of, okay, this is what you're experiencing is understandable and normal doesn't mean okay. Like normal just means like, yes, we're all experiencing this, but it doesn't mean that it's okay. We're not saying, no, it's okay that you're struggling. It's no, this is a period of suffering or of hardship or of whatever it could be. And like kind of validating in that. And then what do we do with that? So lots of validation and normalization, could be, I do a lot of self-compassion work. So talking a lot, you kind of said the shoulds, and we can dive more into any of this, but I'll kind of just give a high level view. So I do a lot of work with self-compassion. So right, instead of using those shoulds or I should do this, we as moms, I think, say should so much to ourselves. So adjusting and kind of doing some self-compassion work. We'll come back to the finding the gray, the both and. I do a lot of both and work of, it doesn't have to be this or this. It's actually both. And how if we hold both, that helps our adjustment. It helps us move through. And then I do a lot of, depending on the mom and kind of what they're needing to work through, I do a lot of trauma and attachment and narrative work. So that's where like EMDR comes in. That's the trauma therapy approach. And so that's where looking at kind of some of these past experiences that we've had. Could be big T traumas of like what we think of when we think of trauma, typically. Or it could be little T traumas, this accumulation of little T traumas of I kept feeling this pattern with my parents and then with my teachers and then with peers. And I left with this belief of I'm not enough. And right, maybe you didn't ever experience a big T, huge trauma, but you have this accumulation of experiences that have reinforce this belief of I'm not enough. And so then you're trying in every single way in your motherhood to be enough. When the realities of a newborn, and then multiple kids, if you have multiple kids, like there is never enough. And so how can we kind of come to this place of acceptance, but also restoring of the not having enough isn't a problem and actually isn't a negative belief to believe about yourself, but how can we kind of rework that? And that's where I won't go into the nitty gritty of EMDR, but I do a lot of kind of that EMDR trauma work, attachment work, story work within my work with clients too.
That's fascinating. I love it. And I can see how, I mean, it's so funny too, because I talk about in the office, we've got thoughts, traumas, toxins. So those are the main
Mhm.
3 T's in chiropractic that we talk about that cause nervous system irritation. But then a lot of times I'm like, we've got the micro traumas, those repetitive tasks. It's the same. I mean, it's
Same thing.
amazing,
Yeah.
but
That's
the
cool.
body, that's why I love the book, The Body Keeps the Score, because you can hold that. And there's so many ways to process it, as far as sometimes I look with chiropractic care as like, let's move this stuckness, let's move this, that, because it can get stuck there. And then, coming in with therapy as well too. And like, let's process this as well and move it along so
Yes.
it doesn't get so stuck.
Yeah.
Or when those things come again, you can be like, whoa, 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 I'm not going down
Mhm.
that path. I'm going to choose this path.
So true. So true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I love that with chiropractic care, I'll sometimes refer to a good massage therapist too, but then pulling in like, right, our body does hold and store. And so EMDR is great because it approaches, we have thoughts, we have how the body is holding on to something, and then emotionally. So when you think back on a trauma that's happened, you might like viscerally feel that or hear things or see things. And so you kind of, that's the way that the body is holding on. And so there's so many ways to release. EMDR is helpful in that it will help release some of that often. But right, kind of our talk therapy usually goes after the thoughts and emotions. And so pulling into some of these body-based approaches, and that's why a lot of times I'll pull on yoga. EMDR work will naturally help kind of connect to body too. But that's what kind of forayed me into the yoga world too, was kind of like, oh, I'm missing a huge chunk here. And
that
so
movement.
movement.
I mean, I constantly am telling people like, I want you to do yoga and move. It doesn't, especially if we've got lots of aches and pains for whatever reason. Because then a lot of times too, I'm trying to figure out, is this ache and pain from someone because of actual physical mechanism of injury, or is this a visceral reaction? Is this a psychosomatic reaction? Because that's very real.
Yeah.
It's very real. And I think a lot
And
of times
sometimes
people
it's
feel
both.
validated. Exactly. And it's both.
Yes.
That's always fun. I'm like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But I think that's validating for people too, when you can say like the brain is very powerful. And so I know that you've been to these other providers and maybe they're not finding anything wrong. And maybe we just mask it with a medication or something, which again, no shame with that, but let's dig a bit deeper and see why we're having that reaction or why that's causing that in the body. But understand, but validating people and like say, okay, it is real. Like, I know you may not have like actually slipped and fallen and, landed on your tailbone, but your tailbone hurts now. Like it's all of these, where's that coming from? And the kind of validating, like the brain is very powerful.
Completely.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you see this from the chiropractic end too, but so often, like, especially with, like an antidepressant or anti-anxiety med, so often I'm thinking of that too, of that allows, your brain, your body to come back to sort of a stable place so that then we can access all of these other tools. And so that's why it's like it's a toolkit. It's that's where the holistic care comes in, of like those things, those medications, they're not bad. They're really important when we use them the right way. And it's not just the one thing we do. It's okay, let's do this. And then when we can find some stability, then we have access to all these other things that we can do too.
I love that you said that, finding that stability. I have a lot of moms that do that. And that's why it's like, okay, this is where we're at now. Doesn't mean we have to stay there, but let's find that stability point where we can work through those things. I know.
Yep. Right. Because if you're in fight, flight, survival, you can't work on those things. Yeah. You're just surviving. Yeah.
You can't. I know. I often say, like, you can't, your body's not going to heal if it thinks it's continually running from a bear. So what are things that we can do to calm it down, calm things down?
Calm things down. Yeah.
What are some things that change in motherhood? Like the normal things that change as we become change that identity shift in motherhood.
Yeah. Yeah. So the normal things that maybe, not okay, not that we want them or that they're comfortable, but it's normal. One big one is brain changes. So I was reading this great book. It's actually called Matrescence by Lucy Score. And
Okay, I've heard of that.
Lucy Jones. Sorry, not
Lucy
Score.
Jones,
Lucy
yeah.
Jones. And it's such a beautiful weaving of like some poetry of her experience, some of her journey through matrescence, and then also she's a scientist of some sort. I should have looked back at it, but so she like weaves in a whole bunch of like really cool science and biology and stuff, and then along with just education about this normal. So but she talks about like the literal brain changes that we experience. And one, this isn't pulling from hers, but it's from something else that I was reading, kind of talking about like, we hear that term mommy brain, where, you know, we probably think of it of like, she's spacey, she's forgetting things, she's so emotional that we have that term mommy brain. One of the articles I was reading talks about how in some of the literal brain changes that we go through is we become more right brain dominant. And so our babies are right brain dominant for the first 2 years of their life. And so moms become right brain dominant to best bond with baby. We have to connect with them through emotions. They don't understand logic. Like, so those brain changes we go to that we call mommy brain because we're spacey and we're not keeping up with life or whatever, they're actually the exact same things that are allowing us to bond well with the baby and have secure and good attachment. And so that's part of that like normalization and restoring of, instead of being this flaky mom who can't stay on top of anything, it's no, my brain and my body, I've changed a lot. My brain has literally changed to be more right brain dominant so that I can connect with this little thing, this little guy, this little girl, so that I can connect. And that's a really beautiful and powerful thing. Yeah, I miss being able to be more on top of things. And also that'll come back to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, to some degree. I'm just going to blame it on my right brain. My right brain is just dominant right now. It's my mommy brain.
Yeah. Totally.
But it's a beautiful innate design, you know, as far as that beautiful, beautiful design. So almost a little bit of like, embrace it a little bit rather than the push on it.
Yes.
But those brain changes,
it's real. Yeah.
It's very real.
Yeah. So that would be one thing. I mean, obviously the dramatic hormone shifts, that would be another one. And everybody experiences that a little bit different. And of course, like how your feeding impacts that too, of like when weaning happens, or when, you know, if there is milk that is drying up or whatever, and kind of when all that happens plays into the hormone shifts. So there's not as much of a, kind of linear, here's what you can expect at 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, because it's a little bit different. But yeah, dramatic hormone shifts regardless, kind of all throughout that first year at least. What else? Things that changed? I mean, our identity. We've added this whole piece of identity of mother. And so maybe you had identity pieces and roles that you had of, you know, work, wife. If you were already a boy mom, I found myself with having a little girl. Speaking of identity, I knew because of this research and because of doing what I do that it would be a change. But my gosh, I did not know. Like this whole
hilarious
girl mom thing. Well, number one, it's really fun because it's so cute. But bows and all that. I mean, my boys are. Football coach is my husband, right? So my boys are boys. They are from day one. It was all the cars, all the balls, all the everything. And so with her, it's been really fun, you know, on the surface things, but there was so much deeper, of like realizing, okay, some of the mom, and matriarchal, I guess, line, and some of those things of like my grandmother's relationship with my mom and my mom's relationship with me, and now my relationship with her, and kind of these generational patterns. And so there's all of that work going on and sort of identity shifting too. So that identity shift is big. It's a lot. And moms can have that same thing, right? With the son. I've got a dear friend who like she had a mom and a sister, dad was out of the picture. And then she had a little boy and she's like, I don't know what to do with boys. And so kind of that,
Mm-hmm.
right. It's not all gender based, but that's just one of the ways in identity. I
Mm-hmm.
think that, identity is kind of shifted and stirred up. And then another thing that I always think about and kind of address and within counseling work too is relationships. Of your relationships change, your ability to have conversation changes. Even when baby's not there, you're constantly thinking about baby, or even when they're older, you're thinking about, okay, is he actually getting to soccer? Who's taking him? Do they actually make it there? Did he remember his shin guards? Like your brain is just doing different things. Yeah. Than pre-kids when you're sitting with a friend, you're actually like with the friend fully. And that's a new sort of, relationships just shift. Yeah.
Yes. There's so many shifts.
Yeah.
Let's go into, I don't know, because I wrote some notes too, though. I wrote yoga and an exclamation point. So I was like, I wanted to talk about that as well.
Let's dive into that for a second.
And like the movement, like, I think that's what just how, so when did the yoga stuff start with you? Because it was after you, and what's trauma conscious yoga? Yeah.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Cool. All right. So I have done yoga. I started yoga in college. And it was actually my way of like, I was experiencing a little bit of dissociative patterns, kind of trauma response. I was really into like, once again, achieving. And I found yoga, and I found it to be both this way of doing really hard things and unnatural things with my body, and like moving my body in different ways, and like, oh, I'm repeating this flow, but I can, as I do it more and more, and through the months, I'm realizing like, oh, this feels different, or, oh, I'm actually feeling like some weird emotion with this movement. And so I just became curious and like fell in love with it. So it was this balance too of like, I had all that movement, but then there was always the shavasana at the end where it was like, then you rest. And I was like, oh, I love this. And so I've practiced yoga now, since college. Once again, became a counselor. Then in motherhood, that was one of the few things that I like jumped back to really quickly. I had a friend that was a yoga teacher at the time, and she said, your doctor hasn't even cleared you 6 weeks. Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I won't do a lot. I just have to like not be mom for a minute. I just have to be here and like breathe.
I think it's a beautiful way to connect with your breath.
Yes.
It's a beautiful way. And that can just like recenter things.
Totally.
So I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. So it was my way of like, okay, I have my feet on the ground. I can feel my breath in my body. I can like show my body some love after all that it's done and all that it's still doing, and work through some of the junk there. Cause there's some junk there after, pregnancy and birth, of course, how could there not be? And yeah, so that was kind of, it was always a personal thing. And then I started doing more trauma therapy, kind of realizing the body piece, with just within my talk therapy work, realizing like, I need to address the body is important here. I'm missing something. And so then it also became just this fun, I love learning. And so it was just this, and COVID happened and I was like, well, let's take a yoga training. And so it was kind of my like for me thing of, I started this yoga teacher training. I did my 200-hour, that's kind of your basic training. I did a 200-hour training. And yeah, just sort of spiraled into it, started teaching a little bit from there. I've now my last year with 300 hours. So after this year, I'll be like a 500-hour trained teacher, which is really exciting.
That's so awesome.
Just to like, and for me, it's like so much fast. Like as we're talking about matrescence, it's so multifaceted here because it's this thing that I like love and need for my self-care and grounding and coming to my breath and helping regulate anxiety and my nervous system. And yes, it's all of those things. And also it's been this really important way that I've invested in myself and my learning and my growth, which is a value of mine. So to be able to do these teacher trainings, like it's once a month for 3 years now, or once a month or twice a month, depending on the month, that on Sunday afternoons, they're mine. And yes, I'm doing a teacher training and I'm, whatever, learning, but I'm in community with other people who love yoga and we're talking about the body and talking about how our body holds stuff and exploring different anatomy. And I just like, it has fed me. And so, yeah. And then of course the trauma conscious piece, I guess to address that last part of that question, I then took an additional training kind of in the middle of all this, have taken a training with the Trauma Conscious Yoga Institute. I can't remember, it doesn't matter how many hours it was, but it was an additional training where she really weaves together your typical kind of yoga teacher training, yoga information alongside trauma work. So it looked a lot at like polyvagal theory. It looked a lot about where different things are stored in the body, where, hips store emotional.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Heart space being open versus closed. And like, we can do a lot of grief work when we're here. And like, this is important, but then also this is. And so, sorry, not everybody's seeing us. I was doing like a rounded back,
flexion,
kind of hunched over, protecting heart space versus opening heart space. But yeah, so, did that training as well. And then have done a few like online, and in the future we'll do more, some online, just trauma-based, yoga, sort of where we always focus on a coping skill and then move and do some yoga and then do some reflection. So this really like holistic, once again, approach of let's do some emotion thought work, but then let's also be moving and helping the body let go of those things.
Movement is key.
Yeah.
I think it's key too.
It's key.
And that's when I look at like, even if I'm looking at chiropractic here, it's like, I've got to get the spine moving, and like move those aspects. And I want proper motion movement. It's the same thing with like that yoga aspect of like, you kind of have to like move it out. I always envision it just kind of like lying out of the body, like move and it releases.
Releases
a little bit.
Yeah,
I know. Just get out.
Yeah.
Okay. So we went back to our yoga thing. I know. I was like, where were we?
We took a rabbit trail.
I know. That's totally fine. But I want to touch too on some of the going into the aspects of what you work on in the office. So I would say there's a little bit of like, you've got the trauma attachment narrative work, a little bit of like that self-compassion work, helping moms find the gray of both and. So I want to kind of dive into, I don't know if it's maybe the tools that you use. I'm trying to think, what do I want people to get out of this? I want them to like hear themselves in this, and then what are tools they can use to help them. Does that make sense? Like, I want someone to be like, oh yeah, I am this attachment style, or that's my narrative, or that's what I struggle with. Okay, what are the things that you do, to help folks with that?
Cool. Yeah. So my first thought would be like self-compassion work, because I think that's something that no matter where we're at, typically within the West, we can be more self-compassionate. We grew up in a culture that's very much achieve, accomplishment, should, judgment based. All our advertising is like, if you have this thing, you'll be better. So we're constantly kind of putting shame and should and that kind of stuff on ourselves. And so self-compassion work is something I do with every client. And it started once again with my own journey of needing to be more compassionate towards myself.
And sometimes I don't think you have to have grown up in a family too where you felt they were pushing you or striving, like, because I feel like I need a lot of work in that, because sometimes the negative self-talk, I'm like, good grief, I'm like, where does this come from? I'm like, I did not have an unsupportive family, they were like, you need to calm down, like everything's fine. So it's kind of like the opposite. So you don't have to have that. I like that you mentioned that it's like, sometimes it's just, I guess, who we are, but then also like society doesn't help, like the advertising of things, of just all that little stuff kind of feeding in. So I think it's important to recognize that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's so true. Yes. Yeah. Because I think we all do, even if it's not a family rule or script or whatever. Most of us have some of that, right, judgmental or harsh or whatever kind of self-talk. Yeah. And it's so interesting. Like, I'm even thinking of my little 7-year-old who yesterday eating, I handed him a little container of peppers. We were making pizzas. And so he's got this little container of peppers. I handed it to him. He was supposed to take the lid off and then put the peppers on. Well, he dropped it. And his immediate thing that he said was, "Oh, what is wrong with me?" And I was like, "Oh, buddy, nothing's wrong with you. It just slipped out of your hand."
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are times, I am far from a perfect mom. I know there are times that I have, said things
right.
or,
You've dropped something
added,
and been like, okay, yeah.
okay.
Oh, yeah.
But that is one, like, I'm like, oh gosh, like it, I could just felt it. But right. That's not something that I know of heard at home, but it's like how quickly, and I don't believe I love his little teachers. I don't know where he's got that, but right. I think so much of that is personality and culture and who knows. And we just start to hear those things and say those things so quickly to ourselves. So with that, right, self-compassion is this idea of, right, it's self-kindness. It's thinking sometimes like, okay, what would I say to a friend? Can I say that to myself instead? That's like one of my quick go-to tools of when I'm hearing a mom talk through something, then, she's putting all of these shoulds or all of these expectations or this judgment on herself. I'm like, wait. Let's pause here. If you had a friend saying this whole scenario to you, what would you tell her? And that, what you would tell her, is typically a very compassionate and kind response. And so speaking to ourselves like we are our friend, and really becoming our own friend, is a large part of compassion work. It's instead of, sometimes we can think of ourselves, I think, as our enemy or as this thing that needs to like get it together. But no, like, I'm doing the best that I can with what I got, and I'm actually doing a really good job. And how can I better encourage myself? Like, that's going to lead to way more change, and better functioning and better mood and better relationships, if I can have kind of more of that approach. So yeah, it's this self-kindness piece. It's this connection in suffering. Like, you're not alone in your suffering. That's another part of self-compassion work is naming, like, okay, this is real. Back to that validating, this emotion you're experiencing, this hardship, this really difficult thing within parenting or within adjustment. That is, yes, part of humanity and part of like this commonality of suffering. And so kind of finding that connection perhaps in suffering, whether it is just literally a counselor telling you yes, and validating that, or it's going to a friend or mom support group or MOPS or, whatever it might be, that there's connection in suffering, and then balanced awareness of, we're not saying like it's way worse for you or way better for you. We have this just balanced awareness of, this is the way things are, kind of, once again, removing that judgment. It's not good or bad. It just is. Yeah.
No, that's important. I think everything that you mentioned, I like the aspect of balanced awareness. I like that. Just those words together, though, that can, I guess, ease some of those, that negative self-talk or whatever it is that's going on, in your, just kind of that balanced awareness. Now I know you mentioned too that you do, you've integrated the Christian faith into counseling as well, as far as when people want it. So what does that look like? Or maybe we can talk about it at the end, like once we go through like all the things, or however we want to talk about it. But I do want to touch on that, how
I'd love
you
to
weave
too.
that in, for those that do want it, to help them, process things. So
Cool.
are we talking about now, or just don't let me forget?
Okay. I'll drop a note. Let's come back to it. Yeah.
So let's go into, okay. So Rachel, my, podcast co-host, we did an episode called Holding Two Truths, and it was, loosely based on that Pathways magazine that I really love, that I have in the office. And it was all about the like and of things, like joy and sorrow, good and bad. I just being very, very like trying to find the exact opposites of things here. But, just that those two, like holding those two truths instead of not because I think when you don't, that's when you can cause a lot of like extra suffering. So I want to go into your thoughts and processes on how motherhood it isn't necessarily so black and white. Like there is a lot of gray area, and maybe helping us like embrace the gray area for those that really like black and white.
Yes. Oh, I hear you on that. Yeah. Yes. Yes. One of the things as you were talking that just immediately leaped to my mind was thinking about bonding and bonding with baby. I think we have this sometimes kind of false expectation or thought of I'm gonna have this baby and know kind of a little bit of what to do with it. I'm gonna bond immediately. I'm gonna love it immediately. And we just have this expectation of this bond being immediate. And the reality that typically, sometimes there is an immediate bond, but very, very often there is a lot of like nuance and gray there of, okay, I see and love this baby more than anything. There's this whole form of love that I never thought possible or knew anything about. And also, every single solitary thing about my life has changed. And I really don't like taking care of this baby all that much because he needs so much all the time. And does that make me a bad mom? And so it's this, once again of, okay, if I don't like taking care of this baby all the time. And so maybe I'm not a good mom. And so maybe that means I'm not bonded. And it just becomes this really black and white of, not a good mom, don't have a good bond with my baby. And what have I done? Where no. Bond, like that attachment, that bond takes time to build, and is multifaceted of, impacted from your relationship with your parents. Also, what kind of baby, like not to say that babies are not good or bad, but there are babies that have colic. There are babies that have digestive concerns. There are babies that just fuss, and there are babies that are just happy, easygoing babies. Having 3 babies that are all very different, I can attest to that. It's just the reality. And so all those things impact like what attachment looks like and how quickly you attach. And so instead of it being this like good or bad mom, I've got good attachment or bad attachment, it's no. Like this is so nuanced and gray of, I can really like loathe parts of motherhood and also be a really great mom. I can love my work and love going to work and send my kids to daycare. And there's a little bit of me that's like, oh, this is hard and sad. And also, I'm so glad to leave you. Like it's both. It's both. And if we can allow all those things to be true, instead of saying, it could be, I drop my girl off at daycare and I'm like, yay. And then I start heaping shame on myself of, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that I am that mom that wants to get rid of her kid and drop her off at daycare. How terrible, I could so quickly snowball there into judgment and shame and all of those things. Instead, it's no. She loves daycare, actually. She has a lot of great little baby friends. I feel like I'm able to fulfill part of calling, part of just things that are life-giving to me when she's there. And also, I'm a better mom. When I pick her up from school, I can be a better mom. I can be more present because I've been able to nourish these different parts of me and my identity. And that's different for every mom too. Like I work with stay-at-home moms that have that same experience around stay-at-home mom kind of life and dynamics. And so, once again, not judging anyone's choice here, but just saying like, it is not black or white. All of those things, holding all of those truths and even those polar kind of very polarized truths together is really important in helping us move through instead of snowballing in the shame and judgment.
Oh yeah. Cause if you don't, it is very easy to snowball.
So easy. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of my quick go-tos with moms too, of like calling out, are you on a snowball thought or a hamster wheel thought is my other language of like, is this one of those thoughts that's going somewhere good? Are you ruminating in this hamster wheel? So you're a hamster on a wheel, right? You're not going anywhere.
I ruminate so well.
So even just having that language for yourself of like, oh, am I on the hamster wheel again? Oh, am I doing that snowball thought? what can I do to stop that thought? How can I
Mhm.
hop off the hamster wheel? How can I stop the snowball? Sometimes it's stop and replace. So you stop the thought and replace it with something else. Sometimes you practice some mindfulness. You get really present, use your five senses, and really engage with here's what's going on around me. Sometimes it's you go find one of your kids. Kids are so good for helping us be present. Of hey, buddy, would you want to play a game real quick and choose a quick card game or a quick game and just like be present with your kid and how quickly that can then get you out of the snowball or the hamster wheel. Yeah.
I know for me, I'm a big runner and I always call running like my therapy. And so that's always really big. But that movement, that process, because I was thinking too, like yoga, flowing through, finding the breath as well.
Yep.
Like
such a good way of getting, movement's huge on getting kind of off the hamster wheel or stopping the snowball. Yeah.
I went for a run over the weekend and I never run with headphones. I ran with a friend the other day too, and we were talking about that. And I was like, I just don't, part of it's like safety stuff. It's like, I'm on the road. I don't know. As like, if you're running by yourself and you're female, I don't think it's the best thing to like run with headphones on. I don't know. Just unfortunately our day and age. But even if I'm out on the trails, I would rather hear the trails. And I even told her, I was like, I'd rather hear my thoughts. Like, this is my time alone. But I was running and the whole time I was like, why is my breathing so loud? Like it was like louder than normal. It was just interesting, the little things that you notice, but it helped me like shift my brain a bit. But I was like, man, I sound like 18 people coming up behind someone. And I was like, am I always this? I am. It was just, I don't know why I noticed that, but it was just very funny. But little things like, that movement aspect. Let's go back to movement.
Yeah.
When you talked about expectations, and that always brings me to like Brene Brown and her work. Totally. And I think a lot of self-suffering could be stopped based on the expectations. Because when I have continually asked myself like, well, why that? Why like on something to kind of try to get to the root of like, this was what happened. This is how I responded. Why? Because it wasn't that event. It was something else that was over here. So trying to get to the part that's over there, it's a lot of times it's been in like an expectation. And I'm like, oh, crap, like, I mean, I guess that's good to be aware of, but those expectations, they can punch you in the face.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like really rudely.
Yes.
So I'm glad you mentioned at least the word expectations in there when we have that self-compassion. I know. Yes. So motherhood is both and. Both and. I know. I think that's a huge statement. I hope that sinks in for people.
So true. Yeah.
And I think when the episode that we did, I think we were talking about motherhood, but I think we were also, it was a lot of like birth because it can, like it's painful, but blissful, like that aspect. So that's kind of where we were going at it with it too. But I think it can apply, in a lot of other
Well, I use
areas
this idea. Well. So really this pulls from dialectical behavior therapy. DBT is a type of therapy approach or a model. And dialectics, that's what dialectics is. It's this both and. And so really this is something that, right, in motherhood, we see a lot of it, but it's for anybody, this idea of both and is actually really, really helpful. It's a very practical and important sort of lens that if we can think through, really helps with the expectation piece, the non-attachment, how we're judging things, and really just helps us to name and move through versus being kind of stuck in this more black and white approach. Yeah.
Name and move through. That's perfect.
Yep.
Okay. So talk a little bit about, some of the trauma work, the attachment work. And I want to go into like, is that like attachment styles that we have? I've spoken to.
I loved that episode, by the way.
Did you? Okay. With Maisie. The friendship one. Oh my gosh. I feel like I had my own little mini therapy session. I was like, wait a minute. Oh my gosh. Can I be multiple attachment styles? I'm like, oh, that explains why. I'm so crazy.
So good.
But I wanted to, is that what you mean with the attachment? So like, I want to go into that. And then the narrative work, is this like rewriting a story that we tell ourselves? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to dive into all of that.
Yeah, cool. Cool. So the detachment work, yes, I would say any of your audience going and listening to that episode with Maisie would be exactly what I'm talking about here.
Okay.
So right, y'all talked about it in the lens within friendship, which absolutely, but thinking
Mhm.
about it too with our kids and with our
Mhm.
partner,
Mhm.
that attachment work, how we're conditioned to believe others are going to show up, and then what we do kind of with that. Am I pushing him away before he can reject me, or am I like in all those sort of micro ways that shows up?
Mhm.
Mine is I don't. It's really hard to ask for help. I didn't
Mhm.
experience a lot of like people being in a place where they were able to like show up and
Modeling
help me
that.
and model that.
Or model it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's mine. I go into this hyper productive, very independent, kind of avoidant style. And, I've learned a lot over thankfully 13 years of marriage, but, yeah, my husband's always like, can you just ask me? And I'm realizing, and through many years, it's like, oh, I can just ask you. But my whole life and my whole belief system has been, um, he won't be able to. He's not going
It's
to show
just
up.
me.
He's not going to help. And that's not, he hasn't taught me that. That's been none of my experience with him, but it's all of what I've learned from either my parents, my other caregivers, teachers, friends, like this. That's kind of that right attachment pattern that's been sort of cemented that I'm now changing. And so that's what's cool about attachment work too, is that just because if we have an avoidant or anxious attachment style, once again, I'm not going to go into all the details here, but if we have one of those kind of attachment styles that is not secure, we can, there's this idea of earned secure attachment, that we can learn how to do secure attachment, that we can move more towards secure attachment. But it's through relationship that we learn to do that. It's through actual like naming what's going on, pressing against the old patterns, and reworking some of those kind of neural pathways and how we show up in relationship. So I don't know. That's why I love attachment work though too, because I'm doing that with clients of, okay, if they're showing up and that, well, I've got to have it all together. How can I kind of like break through that a little bit so that it's safe and we're breaking through it in a way that isn't going to flood them, but also to help them learn like, no, it's okay to not be okay. Like keep showing up here and let's keep working through this. So that's part of like that relational learning of attachment. We do kind of within the therapy relationship itself. So that's a little bit on the attachment work piece. Yeah.
I'm sure there's differences too that people might notice with if it's like attachment with your significant other versus attachment with your friends versus your attachment with your child. Like,
absolutely.
Can you have all kinds of different, because I'm looking at myself and I'm like, I think I have 3 different attachment styles.
Yeah.
Which can make you feel like a hot mess, but but there's room for growth. There's rooms to like work on that. And then thinking of, okay, not only am I bettering myself when I'm working on that attachment, but like now that relationship is going to be stronger. And I know that can actually help, the other person in that relationship with you,
Yes.
and with their attachment style too. So
yeah, so true.
There's so much. I'm fascinated by attachment style.
I feel like attachment, you could have you could have a series on attachment, but you could do a whole episode just on attachment itself and how it shows up with kids, with partner, with friends. And like, right, it's actually different. Likely we have a different attachment experience with our mom versus with our dad. And so those like kind of start to story our attachment patterns. But then, right, our secondary kind of relationships from there, relationships with peers, any of those kind of traumas we experience, perhaps even the little t traumas, all of that sort of plays into then our attachment style as well.
So I love it. The trauma work. So you talked about the conscious yoga training that you do, and then EMDR as well. Did you want to speak any more on that? Or did you?
No, I feel like we talked a pretty good amount about it. I mean, it's a certain, a specific therapy or trauma therapy approach. Kind of does those 3 things of emotions, thoughts, and body awareness. We look back at the past traumas that you've experienced. I guess the one other piece,
That's the big and the littles.
when we have, when we've experienced trauma, our body stores it, and trauma is stored and kind of gets stuck. And so when we do EMDR, it helps that to not be so stuck anymore. It moves, it kind of reintegrates all of those pieces, the body, the thoughts, the emotions. It reintegrates, restores those in a more healthy way. And then it moves to long-term memory storage instead of being stuck and triggered, that triggered word, and present experiences. So something that happens, right? It triggers a trauma and then you respond out of that default pattern. When we've done EMDR, that trauma is reprocessed and moved to long-term memory storage. So the trigger happens and you might still have that little like, kind of like immediate gut little check thing going on, but you can actually choose like, oh, no. Like you have more awareness. There's then this, I think a lot about this space between the what happens in your response. That when we do trauma work, we create that space so that we can then choose how to respond instead of responding out of this, triggered response reaction. Yeah,
exactly. Oh, I love it. Do you work a lot with moms with birth trauma?
Yes.
Yeah. And processing that.
I love, I mean, not to say I love birth trauma. I don't love birth trauma.
I know what you mean though. Yeah.
No, but I've taken some additional trainings on kind of our birth story and kind of being able to tell our birth story and restoring birth story. And so sometimes the restoring work, speaking of restoring, could be birth trauma work of, okay, here's what you experienced. And I think too, with speaking of like birth trauma, there's so often this experience too of like, okay, mom's okay, baby's okay, so woohoo. No. Like there is still so much that maybe it's stuck in your body, or you're still, maybe there's flashes of images, maybe there's, you really feared for your life, your baby's life. And then that's playing out in postpartum anxiety because it wasn't in your control in your birth experience. And so then you've had this overactive alarm switch on in your body to say, hey, I got to be on high alert because we're in danger. And it's so quick to be triggered that then you become this, you have all these intrusive thoughts. And not to say intrusive thoughts always stem from birth trauma, but it's really common
that can be
moms experience intrusive thoughts because of unprocessed birth trauma. And so, some of that trauma work definitely. And sometimes that looks like EMDR, and there's really specific kind of capsulated way, almost contained way of doing EMDR with a single event so that it stays very, very contained. And like, we're just going to work on birth and then we're going to just sort of kind of move on, versus EMDR a lot of times can be this whole like, okay, we're looking at your whole life and how this one experience then went back to such XYZ. So there's different types like kind of within EMDR, but sometimes I'll use sort of that single event kind of approach with EMDR to say, okay, we're just going to reprocess birth here and really make this so that it is digested and not stuck in your brain and in your body.
No, that's important. Definitely for processing. And I'm glad you mentioned it too, because a lot of times you might even hear from like intentioned friends and stuff like, oh, at least mom and baby's healthy and stuff, but like it could have been
I always go back to that yes
different.
And with that of yes, I'm so thankful mom and baby are healthy, absolutely. And also that was terrifying and sucked. Like yes,
exactly.
Yes.
I feel like that could like sum up a lot of things. Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of the narrative work though, and what that looks like.
Yeah. So it totally depends. I am a avid journaler. And so if I have clients that are open to journaling, I'm always encouraging
journaling.
That.
I love journaling.
Good. Yeah. So sometimes the restoring looks like some homework in a sense of like, hey, can you write out that story of what happened? And then can we work on that together in session? Can you bring that in and let's look at that story you've been telling. And then kind of me gently saying, okay, wait, can we come back to this paragraph? Okay, what's happening here? And just asking some questions and saying like, is there something different there that actually could have been going on? Is there a zoom out that we could take? Or what about this other person in the room? What was their perspective? Or, right, what were you experiencing then and how did that feel? Versus what do you know to be true? because those can be very different.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this kind of, it's really layered, I guess, as I'm sitting here talking through it. But then this like, okay. And then I always go with choice here too. Okay. Do you want to keep telling this story the way that you've written it? Or now that we've really like talked through it a little bit, would you want to change it a little bit? What would that look like? Do you want to go home and work on it some more? And just kind of invite that process. So sometimes it is a literal, like we're writing out a story, especially for my people who like journaling. And that writing can be such a good way to help process. Yeah. And not to say the first story's wrong. Like I always want to stress that too, of that.
Yeah.
That first way you wrote it, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Like
But maybe it's not the whole story.
Maybe it's not the whole story or the best way to tell the story. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe there's, you think about any story we read, like a novel you read, right? Or a movie you watch, like there are many ways to tell that same story. And some are going to be more impactful. One's going to tug on the sadness more and one's going to tug on the beauty more, depending on how you tell the story. They're both the same story. They're both the same events that happened, but we're looking almost through a different lens.
Yes.
And maybe a healthier lens. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I want to touch a bit on, I wanted to come back to how you integrate faith.
Yeah.
That Christian faith for those who want it and desire it. Like, is that something you can add into like the narrative work or whatnot, and some of the trauma work? And what does that look like?
Yeah. I love it. So the way that I do Christian integration in my sessions is, well, very much client driven. So I'm going to see kind of where the client's relationship is with God, with the Trinity, because we typically have a different relationship with God, Jesus, Holy Spirit. So we kind of might look at those three things. We kind of look at God image, like how does the person, maybe kind of what are they thinking about God? Is God mean and judgmental? Is God kind and loving? Kind of looking through some of those things. Like these are just some of the approaches we might take, but I'm always starting with where my client is and trying to understand like what their sort of religious framework is so that I can work within that. I don't ever want to come in with a Bible verse or with this is the way that it is, because faith is so much bigger than that.
Right.
God is so much bigger than that. And so I often, the way that I think about it is I want God to show up in session the way that he wants to show up in session. And I want to be out of the way. And so sometimes it looks like, if we're looking at story work or trauma work, it's sometimes like clients will, as I'm processing, it'll be this, or as we're reprocessing a trauma, I have had some clients with really strong relationships with God who then sort of have this almost spiritual experience. And it's not an over spiritualization or anything by any stretch, but it's this like, oh, no. Like I can like sort of feel Jesus here maybe, or I can, I feel this Holy Spirit in me kind of stepping into this experience or this memory, and Holy Spirit in me, this true self would be your IFS language, that other therapy approach I worked from, but you're kind of that true self, higher self, Holy Spirit self, can then speak to that wounded part. And so a lot of times it looks like that, of like, is there some false thinking there of, are you misunderstanding perhaps what scripture says based on some of these teachings or experiences, or who knows what, just this maybe black and white thinking once again that you've gotten in. And maybe I'm not to say if it's true or not. Like that's where I'm like, I get out of the way. I want God to do what God does in those moments. And so that's really my approach with Christian integration. And it's very much like I'm wanting, I always want, and I don't know, maybe this is like related to how I think about religion and just how I do relationship, but I always want to leave an interaction to where the person can feel closer to God instead of more blocks between them and God. And I think so often, whether it's a church message or a therapy session, I've heard so many bad therapy sessions of, well, the therapist said XYZ and said like there was this way about doing marriage is the way to do marriage, or this way about doing parenting is the way to do parenting. And I don't ever come from that approach. I always just err saying, and maybe that's the blessing of being a counselor, if I don't have to operate in those certainties. But to be able to say like, no, like what is God telling you here? When you read scripture, what is your understanding here? And that's kind of my approach with the Christian integration piece.
I think that's an important aspect for folks to add in, though, to have, I don't know, to add that into
the holistic
narrative
healing. For me especially, there's not healing apart from my faith. That was a huge crux of like the identity piece of, I had one belief about who God was and how he showed up, that when I became mom, and was counselor and mom and doing all these things, and then seeing all this trauma and suffering, there was a huge reckoning with me and the Lord. Jacob wrestling with the Lord, that was me. And the limp, like, that's, yes. Like there isn't, we can't heal if we're not addressing that spiritual stuff too. When we go back to holistic, that spiritual aspect of us is part of the healing. We have to address all of it to reach healing.
The holistic approach. Yay! Gosh, we talked about a lot. We did it. We got through it all. I know. Sorry, it's a little long, but
no, I'm sorry, but this was
that
great.
was so good. I know. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on that maybe we didn't, or anything else you wanted to say? I think
nothing that leaps to mind.
Really
I feel like we hit my heartbeat. Like that's what I feel like. Like I'm like, this is
I think we hit the take home points. Well, I'm so thankful that you were on the show today. Okay. Tell folks where they can connect with you and reach out to you.
Yeah. So I've got, I'm on Instagram. That's probably the quickest and easiest way. It's Kristina with a K, Tucker, HRC for Healing Roots Counseling. At this point, if you Google me, if you Google Kristina Tucker and Counselor Georgia, if you put that in there, you'll find multiple websites kind of pointing to me, counselor directories and stuff. My business is Healing Roots Counseling. And so you can find me there. And then I've also started a little newsletter kind of more relating to, it is counseling related, but it's, so it's on Substack. I'm just playing around with some writing back to identity and who the heck am I? Kind of this right into girl mom life and mom of 3 life. There's been this whole like creative energy that I'm just putting towards some writing. So I've started a Substack, and that's been kind of fun too, to write some more just personal stories, but tying in, kind of counseling and spirituality, along with my story, kind of those 3, points. So, and it's all linked from my Instagram. That's why I say Instagram is probably the best way, because if you find me there, then in my bio, there's the tap link thing and you can get to all of it.
And it'll link to everything. Yay. Yeah. Well, I'm going to put the, all the links to your things, in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
So
and also like, if anybody has any follow-up questions or anything, emails on the website. I've also got like a little contact form on my website. You could always reach out there. I love just talking through these things, or if you want a referral for anything, or just like, hey, what you said about XYZ really resonated and I'd love to talk more. Like, please shoot me a message. Like that type of conversation is really life-giving. So I would love to do that. Like, no hesitancy. Please reach out if anything, if you want to about anything. So yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. I am so glad you were on the show today. This was perfect. I think we talked about so many things. And again, I hope this conversation leaves people better than when we first started,
Me
I
too.
think it was very healing. So again, thank you, friend. Be sure to check out the links for the show notes, because I'll have links to past episodes, links to ways to get in touch with Kristina as well. And then stay tuned every Wednesday for another episode. Thank you for joining us on the Aligned Birth Podcast. We hope you found our discussions informative, inspiring, and enjoyable. Remember, when your body, mind, and intuition are aligned, you have the power to overcome any challenge that comes your way. We appreciate your support and leaving a review or rating, signing up for our newsletter, or becoming a direct listener supporter. Your contribution helps us continue delivering valuable content and reaching more listeners like yourself. Stay connected with us through our newsletter to receive the latest episodes and bonuses straight to your inbox each week. You can also connect with us on Instagram at aligned_birth. All links can be found in the show notes. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of the birthing individuals and new moms. Thank you for being a part of our community. We look forward to sharing more empowering conversations on the Aligned Birth podcast. Until next time.